The order cut through the comms like a final verdict. There's no way out. Fall back if you can. It came from a colonel whose voice had never once wavered until now. But as the flames rolled across the horizon and enemy tracers stitched the night sky, someone else keyed their mic, a voice no one had expected. Calm, steady, almost too calm for what was happening. Stay low, follow my mark. There's still a path. Every head in the cockpit turned. Who was that? They didn't know it yet, but the pilot no one counted on was about to change everything. You're watching the story Scape, where impossible odds collide with unforgettable courage. Before we begin, drop a comment and tell us, where in the world are you watching from? The valley was a trap. Every soldier on the ground knew it, and every pilot circling above felt the same truth pressing in. They had flown into a cage of fire. Columns of black smoke rose from burning wreckage, twisting upward into the dusk like signals of defeat. On the ridges, anti-air batteries fired in relentless arcs, tearing through the sky with ribbons of orange flame. The comms were chaos, shouts, static, screams, and over it all, the colonel's grim voice repeated, "No way out." In that moment, the air itself felt heavier, as though hope had been sucked out of the atmosphere. Crews tightened their harnesses. Some prayed, some swore, others just waited for impact. And then, silence. Not in the battle, but in the comms. One frequency, dead quiet, until a voice rose from it, clear as steel. She hadn't been part of the plan, not really. Officially, she wasn't even listed on the mission roster. She was supposed to be a backup, an observer, someone tucked away at the edge of the squadron, filling in gaps when real pilots couldn't fly. That's how they saw her. That's how they dismissed her. But she had trained in the shadows for years, and when the colonel's voice cracked with defeat, she felt the weight shift. Someone had to step forward. "Stay low, break south, on my lead." The words hit the squadron like a lifeline. On the ground, the SEALs were pinned against jagged rocks, the ridges above spitting fire. Their ammo was running out. The extraction point was already compromised. They heard the colonel's call, "No way out," and understood what it meant. And then, over the comms, a new call sign they'd barely recognized broke through. "Valkyrie, copy, taking lead." The SEAL commander froze. Valkyrie? That code name hadn't been used in years. Whoever spoke it wasn't just any pilot. They were someone who'd been erased from the books. But here she was again, in the worst firestorm of the war. Her jet roared past, engines howling, cutting through tracer fire so close it lit up the underside of her wings. She didn't flinch. She didn't break. She marked a path through the inferno that no one else dared to fly. The squadron hesitated. Should they follow her? She wasn't in command. She wasn't even supposed to be here. And yet, something in her voice, the absolute certainty of it, pulled them in. "On my wing, now!" And one by one, they banked toward her. The colonel's orders still rang in their ears. Retreat, abandon, accept loss. But this hidden pilot was offering something else entirely. A sliver of survival carved straight through fire. She dove low, hugging the ridgeline so close sparks from the enemy guns clipped her fuselage. Her targeting computer screamed warnings. Her oxygen mask fogged with her breath. Her hands never shook. Every second in that valley felt stolen, every breath borrowed. But with each maneuver, she opened a gap, widened a corridor no one believed existed. And behind her, for the first time in hours, soldiers and pilots alike saw something that wasn't fire or smoke. They saw a way out. But survival was never free. The enemy adjusted, cannons swinging, radars locking.
They realized too late that the squadron had found a leader, and if they didn't cut her down, every trapped soldier might live to fight another day. She knew it too. That's why she pressed forward, faster, lower, straight into the teeth of fire. Stay tight, don't break. Her voice was steady, but inside the cockpit, her pulse hammered. One mistake, one hesitation, and the squadron behind her would be shredded. And yet, she didn't pull back, not once. Because what none of them knew, not the colonel, not the squadron, not even the SEALs below, was that this pilot carried a secret the war had tried to bury. And the only way to reveal it was to survive this run. The colonel's silence on the comms said more than any order could. He had commanded men through 30 decades of fire, but now even he didn't know how to process what was happening. Someone had seized the lead, and it wasn't him. It was the voice behind the call sign, Valkyrie. The name carried weight. Years ago, it had been whispered in debrief rooms and written into reports with lines struck through in black ink. The kind of code name that only appeared in missions no one was supposed to remember. It belonged to someone who had walked away or had been pushed out long before this war turned brutal. And yet here she was, flying like the sky still belonged to her. For the SEALs on the ground, pinned by machine gun fire and the pounding echo of mortars, the name sparked something between disbelief and hope. If Valkyrie was alive, if she really was up there, then maybe the valley wasn't a graveyard after all. Bullets sparked across the rock face as Chief O'Hara ducked lower into the dust. His men were bleeding, scattered, one radio unit shattered beyond repair. He shouted into the static, "Say again, who's on comms?" A pause, then the voice, calm, clipped, unmistakable. "Valkyrie, I'm not dead yet. Marking your exit."
The squad froze. Every man knew the story. Valkyrie had been declared gone, lost in a Black Ops flight that never returned. Some said she'd been shot down. Others whispered she'd walked away from command itself. Either way, the conclusion had been the same. She was gone. Until now. High above, her jet carved a line through tracer fire, banking with precision that no one else dared. The squadron followed, like steel pulled by a magnet. Inside her cockpit, her breathing was steady, but her mind was a storm. She had left this world behind. She had sworn never to fly under their command again. But seeing the squad trapped below, the colonel resigning them to death, ignited something she had tried to bury. "No one gets left in the valley," she muttered to herself, gripping the throttle. Because she remembered the last time she had trusted command. She remembered how it ended, and she would not let history repeat itself. The colonel finally snapped back into comms. His voice was hard, almost shaking. "Pilot, stand down. That's an order." She didn't even answer. Orders had already killed enough good men. Instead, she dropped altitude, cutting so close to the ground that dirt whipped up behind her. Her HUD lit with warnings, heat signatures locked on. She pushed lower, faster. She had only one thought. If she could draw fire to herself, the squadron might just live. The jets behind her staggered. Some pilots hesitated, but others pressed forward, refusing to abandon her lead. They didn't know her face. They didn't know her history, but they knew courage when they saw it. And courage was contagious. On the ground, O'Hara's men felt the shift. Enemy fire that had pinned them for hours suddenly tracked skyward, chasing the one jet, crazy enough to skim the ridges like a bird hunting its own reflection. O'Hara grabbed the moment. "Move! South face! Go now!" The SEALs scrambled, dragging their wounded, hearts pounding as the sky roared above them. But even as hope cracked through, they knew one truth. If that pilot didn't make it out, none of them would either. In the cockpit, alarm screamed. A missile lock painted her canopy red. She yanked the stick hard, pulling into a roll so tight the jet rattled like it would come apart. The missile streaked past, exploding against the cliff in a spray of molten rock. Her vision blurred. Gravity crushed her chest. She forced herself to breathe, to focus, to stay alive one more second. "Still with me?" she called over the comms. Voices answered back, one by one, jets still in formation, seals still moving. The impossible run was holding, but only just. The colonel's voice returned, this time quieter, like a man wrestling with the truth in front of him. "Who are you?" She almost laughed. He knew. He had to know. "The one you buried." Static filled the line after that. No denial, no correction, just silence.
Because the colonel remembered, too. The mission they had never spoken of again. The pilot they had erased. The code name they had sworn belonged to a ghost. And now that ghost was flying point, carrying them all out of a death trap. But ghosts don't always stay. And as another missile lock screamed in her ears, she knew this run would end one of two ways. She would get them out, or she would burn here, nameless, once again. As the seals broke toward the southern face and the squadron clung to her lead, an entire battery of guns shifted their aim, not at the colonel, not at the formation, but directly at her. And for the first time she wondered, was this the moment the war finally claimed Valkyrie for real? The ridgeline lit up like a burning wall. Tracers stitched the sky in blinding chains, and every barrel pivoted toward one target, her. She felt the heat before the alarm screamed. Radar lit up, a storm of locks flooding her display until the screen was more red than green. For any other pilot, it was the end. But she didn't fly like other pilots. She never had. She pulled the stick, flipping her jet on its side and diving so close to the canyon wall, the paint on her wings scraped stone. Fire followed, chasing her through turns so sharp that the rest of the formation couldn't even keep visual. And yet, somehow, she didn't vanish. Not this time. Not like before. Inside the colonel's cockpit, sweat beaded under his helmet. He had seen reckless maneuvers before. He had buried pilots who tried them. But this was different. Whoever she wasn't fighting for glory. She was fighting like someone who had nothing left to lose. "Valkyrie," he said again, voice low, like he was testing if the name still belonged to her. The reply came sharp. "Eyes forward, Colonel. I'll get your men out. You just keep up." The colonel's jaw tightened. She wasn't taking orders, she was giving them. On the ground, the seals kept moving, pushing toward the southern slope as dust and fire rained down. They had dragged wounded men before, but never under skies like this. The roar above wasn't just cover, it was defiance. A single pilot screaming at the world that retreat wasn't the only option. Chief O'Hara caught the eyes of one of his men. Both of them had heard the same rumors years ago, about the mission that was erased, about the female pilot who had flown into fire so deep command wrote her off as dead. And now she was here, alive, cutting the sky apart in front of them. But the question that gnawed at O'Hara was simple. If she had been alive all this time, why had she stayed hidden until now? She remembered why.
Every pull of the stick, every warning tone in her ears dragged her back years. Back to the mission they never spoke of. The one that had ended with her squadron falling, one by one, until only she remained. She had carried them as far as she could, flown until her jet bled fuel and metal, and then vanished into silence. Command had called it failure. The colonel had signed the report, and just like that, her name was struck off, her call sign,
buried. But ghosts remember. And tonight, the ghost they buried was flying again. She banked hard left, catching sight of the squadron still trying to stay with her. They were scattered, uncoordinated, too used to being led from the top down. She couldn't let them break apart. Tighten formation. Follow my flare. Her thumb tapped the release. A streak of light arced across the canyon, cutting a path through smoke and fire. For the pilots behind her, it was a lifeline. They dove after it, trusting her mark more than their instruments. And for a moment, the impossible became possible. The squadron was flying as one again, but the enemy had noticed too, and they weren't about to let a ghost lead anyone out alive. A radar alarm shrieked. This one was different, heavier, bigger. She glanced at her display and froze. Not a single missile, not even a battery. A full SAM sight had locked her. She gritted her teeth. The colonel's voice cut in, sharp, panicked. "Break off! That's a kill zone! No one outruns that lock!" She ignored him. She'd heard those words before. No one survives. No way out. She was done listening to them. Her hands steadied. Her voice stayed calm. "Stay on me. I'll draw it." The squadron behind her erupted in protest. No pilot survived pulling a SAM away. It was suicide. But she was already pulling nose up, forcing the missile to track her heat signature. In the valley below, the SEALs looked up just as the launch flash split the night. The missile tore into the sky, smoke and fire twisting behind it as it locked onto her jet like a predator. Chief O'Hara muttered a curse under his breath. His men stopped running, eyes fixed upward. They couldn't help it. They were watching history repeat. Because every story they'd heard about Valkyrie ended the same way, with fire, silence, and a name erased from the records. She yanked hard, pulling her jet into a vertical climb so her body screamed against the G-force. The missile chased, closing, a streak of death rising toward her. Her cockpit rattled, alarms blaring, vision tunneling. She whispered under her breath, not to herself, but to the men below, to the squadron behind her, to the colonel who had buried her name. "Not this time!" Her jet disappeared into cloud. The missile followed, and then
The sky erupted in a flash, so bright it turned night into day. For a heartbeat, no one could see her. No one knew if she was alive. The colonel's voice cracked over the comms, raw and human for the first time. "Valkyrie, report!" But only static answered. The flash swallowed everything. For one blinding second, the valley was no longer stone and fire, it was pure white. The missile had struck, the air had cracked apart, and every man below were certain they'd just watched Valkyrie's ghost vanish a second time. The comms exploded with shouts, pilots yelling, SEALs cursing. Even the colonel's voice cracked into something raw and helpless. "Valkyrie, do you copy? Report! Report!" Only static answered. And in that silence, old wounds bled open again. Because hadn't this always been the story? She appeared when the fire was hottest, burned brightest when there was no hope left, and then she was gone. On the ground, Chief O'Hara slammed his fist into the dirt. Around him, his men faltered, staring at the sky that no longer held their miracle. They had trusted a ghost, and now they were back where they started, trapped, outnumbered, bleeding out in the canyon. One of his men whispered, "She didn't make it." O'Hara almost believed it. Almost. Until his headset cracked alive again. Just a breath, ragged but real. "Still here." The words froze every man where they stood. High above, fire still rolled across her canopy,
But she was alive. She had yanked the jet into a roll at the last second, flaring decoys so close to the rock face the missile detonated early. It had still torn half her wing apart, rattled her jet like a coffin being nailed shut, but she wasn't down. Not yet. Her cockpit smelled of burning insulation. Warning lights pulsed like veins of fire across the console. Her left aileron was gone, but her voice was steady. South face is still open. Move. The SEALs did not hesitate this time. If she could cheat death twice, then they could at least run once. Because if a ghost refused to die, then maybe they weren't meant to either. The colonel couldn't believe it. He had watched her jet vanish in that blast. He had already marked her gone in his mind, the way he had years ago. And yet, here she was, bleeding metal across the sky, and still leading. He muttered to himself, "How many times can one pilot rise from fire?" No one answered, but every man in his squadron was now flying tighter on her tail, as though proximity alone could anchor them to her defiance. Her mind was steady, but memories gnawed at the edges. She remembered the last time she had felt this, smoke choking her cockpit, warnings blaring, squadrons scattered. Back then, she had been the last one alive. Back then, command had turned her survival into an accusation.
They had erased her because she had lived when others didn't. They had called it cowardice. They had called it failure. But they had never flown with her lungs burning, her bones rattling, her hands refusing to let go. "You don't bury me," she whispered to herself, eyes fixed on the ridge ahead. Enemy fire clawed at the sky, but something had shifted. It wasn't just the SEALs moving now, it was the entire squadron believing again. They matched her altitude, copied her maneuvers, trusted her path through the inferno. And in that moment, she wasn't just Valkyrie, the ghost. She was their leader. The colonel knew it too, and for the first time in years, he realized he was no longer the one holding the sky together. But the enemy wasn't finished. As she dragged her crippled jet lower, hugging the southern ridgeline, she saw it. Another SAM battery, hidden until now, rising from the rocks like the valley itself was alive and trying to devour her. Her radar screamed, the colonel's voice barked, "You can't take another hit, break off." She ignored him, again. Instead, she keyed the comms, voice sharp, leaving no room for doubt. "Colonel, keep your men on me. I'll draw the battery. You push them through the gap." The colonel barked back, furious. "That's suicide." Her voice didn't flinch. "Then it's my suicide, but they live." On the ground, O'Hara heard it. Every SEAL did. And the weight of it cracked something inside them. She wasn't just risking herself, she was offering her life as the price of theirs. O'Hara grabbed his radio, shouting into the chaos, "Valkyrie, don't you dare! We need you in the sky!" But she didn't answer. She rolled her jet, limping wings groaning, and aimed straight at the hidden SAM site. Every alarm screamed at once. She had seconds, maybe less. Her past pressed in on her, the memory of the first time she had been erased, the way they had buried her call sign under silence. But tonight was different. Tonight, every soul in this valley would remember her name. Because this wasn't about survival anymore. This was about rewriting the ending. The SAM battery locked. The missile rose, cutting through smoke and shadow, locked tight on her crippled jet. Every sensor screamed the same truth. There was no escape. But Valkyrie had never been the kind to ask for escape. She wanted control, even if the only way to seize it was to fly straight into death's teeth. Her hand steadied on the stick. The world narrowed to crosshairs and warning tones. The colonel's voice cracked across the comms.
Break off, damn it! That's an order! She smiled beneath her oxygen mask, a bitter edge to it. You buried me once for disobeying orders, Colonel. Looks like I'm about to do it again. And with those words, the past slammed into the present, because now everyone knew. Years ago, she had been ordered into a valley just like this one, a mission no one wanted to remember. Her squadron had been ambushed, ripped apart, and when she tried to save what was left, she was told to retreat. She didn't. She fought, she flew, and she was the only one who came out alive. Command didn't see survival. They saw insubordination. So they erased her name, buried her call sign, pretended she never existed. But ghosts don't die quietly. And tonight, she wasn't just rewriting her ending. She was tearing theirs open, too. The missile closed fast, its smoke trail cutting through the night like a blade. She rolled, flared decoys, her jet coughing sparks as she forced it to climb higher than it had strength for. Her display warned airspeed critical, structural failure imminent. She ignored it. She had one trick left, something only a pilot willing to burn everything would try. Colonel, keep your squad moving. Don't look back. The colonel's reply was ragged. Valkyrie, you won't. Just do it. She cut the throttle, dropping speed so fast the missile overshot by meters. Then, full afterburner. Her jet lurched forward, fire exploding from its engines as she rode the heat wake guiding it like a rider pulling a wild beast. The pilots behind her gasped into their mics. They had never seen a maneuver like this. They would never dare it themselves. But here she was, dragging death along like it was just another wingman. And the place she was dragging it toward was no accident. She aimed it straight at the SAM battery itself. On the ground, O'Hara and his man had just reached the south face when they saw it. The jet limping, the missile chasing, both screaming toward the ridge like two comets locked in a collision course. One SEAL whispered, "She's not dodging, she's guiding it." O'Hara clenched his jaw. "She's turning their own fire back on them." The men stopped running, caught between awe and terror. They had seen bravery before. They had seen madness, too. This was something else entirely. The SAM operators realized too late. They tried to cut the lock, to shut down the system, to reset their fire, but the missile was already committed. It slammed back into its own nest, detonating in a roar that shook the valley. Fire rolled skyward, rocks shattered, and the ridgeline itself collapsed into dust. Her jet ripped through the smoke trail, battered but alive, wings screaming against the turbulence. The squadron erupted over comms, pilots shouting, cheering, calling her name. But she didn't answer. Inside the cockpit, she was barely holding on. The blast had torn more than the ridge. It had gutted her jet. Instruments flickered, hydraulic pressure bleeding out. She could feel the stick softening in her hands, the machine dying beneath her. The colonel's voice cut in, shaken, almost reverent. "You just did the impossible." Her voice rasped through static. "It's not over. Get them out. That's the mission." Because she knew her jet wasn't going to make it. But if the squadron and the SEALs reached the gap, maybe her ghost could finally rest. The SEALs pushed harder, fueled by what they had just witnessed. Even the wounded found strength they didn't know they had. Because when someone flies into fire to give you one more chance, you take it. You run with it. But O'Hara couldn't shake one thought. She had just saved them twice. Who was going to save her? The colonel wrestled with the same thought. He'd spent years believing she was gone, years convincing himself it was easier that way. Now she was alive, and he was about to watch her fall again. He couldn't let it happen, not this time. "Valkyrie, listen to me. Hold altitude. I'm coming to you." She laughed softly, bitter and tired. "Colonel, you were never there when it mattered."
The words cut deeper than any missile. Her jet bucked again, alarms howling. She was minutes, maybe seconds from losing control completely. Smoke curled into her cockpit, stinging her eyes, fogging her mask. Her body screamed for oxygen, for rest, for release. But she held the stick steady, because she had made a vow long ago, on the day command buried her name. If she ever flew again, she would never abandon the men below. Not once, not ever. And even if tonight was her last flight, at least this time, she wouldn't fly alone. Her jet dipped, nose sliding toward the canyon. She fought it, muscles burning, but the machine was dying beneath her. The colonel's voice roared across the comms, desperate. "Valkyrie, hold on!" But her reply was quiet, almost a whisper. "Colonel, don't bury me yet." And then her signal cut. The canyon tilted beneath her canopy. Every warning light glared red. Every system bled out. She was holding a jet that wanted to die, and for a moment she wondered if it would take her with it. The colonel's voice kept hammering the comms. "Valkyrie, pull up! Hold on! Do not let go!" She forced a breath, vision narrowing, chest burning. Her hands trembled on the stick, but her voice stayed steady. "You think I came back to crash in silence, Colonel? Not tonight. Because tonight wasn't about surviving. Tonight was about being seen. Truly seen. For the first time since the war erased her."
On the ground, the SEALs had made it to the southern gap. Dust clouded around them, gunfire fading behind them. They should have been celebrating. They were alive. But none of them could look away from the sky. Every man stood still, staring upward, waiting to see if the ghost would fall or rise. Chief O'Hara muttered, almost a prayer, "Come on, Valkyrie, one more flight." Her cockpit shook like a dying heart. Altitude dropped fast, too fast. At this rate, she'd slam into the ridge before she ever saw the horizon again. She scanned her instruments, searching for anything left to give. The hydraulics were gone. One engine was coughing itself to death. But buried in the noise was a flicker, auxiliary thrust, barely functional, like a match in a storm. It was enough. "Colonel, mark my path. They'll follow you from here." His voice cracked. "What about you?" Her laugh was hoarse, filled with smoke. "I'll find my own way out. Isn't that what I always do?" She punched the auxiliary thruster. The jet lurched, not climbing, but leveling, just enough to keep her above the canyon floor. Dust exploded beneath her wings as she skimmed the valley, each second a gamble against gravity. Above, the squadron watched in disbelief. Pilots who had trained their whole lives, who thought they had seen every maneuver possible, now whispered to themselves like children watching a miracle. Because only a ghost could fly a dead machine, and somehow she was still flying. The colonel's jet slid in beside her, battered but steady. For the first time in years, he wasn't above her, wasn't commanding her, he was with her. He keyed his mic, voice low. "I was wrong." She kept her eyes on the horizon. "You buried me alive, Colonel. That's something you don't come back from." Silence stretched between them, heavier than gunfire. Finally he spoke again. "Then let me fly with you, just once, the way I should have before." She didn't answer. But she didn't push him away either. Side by side, they cut through the smoke, limping wings carving the sky like broken blades refusing to fall. Below, the SEALs reached open ground. Dust caked their faces, blood on their gear. But every man stopped to salute the sky. Because they knew, whatever happened next, none of them would have lived without the pilot no one counted on. Chief O'Hara whispered her call sign under his breath. Valkyrie. The name carried on the wind, up to the broken jet still clawing at the horizon. Her cockpit filled with alarms again. Altitude dropping, fuel bleeding out. She didn't have minutes left.
She had seconds. She keyed the comms one last time, voice steady despite the fire in her lungs. "Colonel, get them home. That's your order." He tried to protest, but she cut him off. "This is the mission. This always was the mission." And then, for the first time since the day they erased her, she spoke her own name. Not the one command had buried, not the ghost they had whispered about. Her real name, her truth. The comms went silent. Her jet skimmed the last ridge, trailing fire like a comet. No one knew if she cleared the valley or if the sky finally claimed her. But every man who walked out of that trap carried the same story. When the colonel said there was no way out, a hidden pilot rose from the fire and proved him wrong. And from that day on, the name Valkyrie was never buried again.